If we're talking about Fire Emblem Fates, it's become a bit of a meme that everyone in the game is obsessed with Corrin. Everybody loves Corrin so much, and honestly, even in the story, this is pretty much true. But what if I told you that even in the game's code itself, almost every single character is predisposed to love Corrin more than any other character? I'm going to explain to you how and why this happens, and I also think I may have found a character who loves Corrin more than anyone else. But first, we need some context. I recently made a video about canon pairings in Fire Emblem Awakening by investigating the game's mechanics, and I found that in Awakening, characters always have one partner who they are hard-coded to build a romantic support and get married faster than anyone else. So, for example, Stahl builds a relationship with Miriel faster than any other character, and most everyone in the game has one specific partner who works this way. As a result of that video, I got many comments asking me if Fates works the same way, and asking me to investigate the relationships in Fates, and make a follow-up video about Fates. So here's that video. Now, unfortunately, my immediate conclusion when looking into the game data is that Fates definitely does not work the same way, and it gives us much less conclusive information to go on. You see, in Fates, they basically removed this system entirely and replaced it with a new, very simplified system. Now, there are only medium supports and fast supports. All of the medium supports grow at the same speed, and all of the fast supports grow at the same fast speed. To make matters worse, the number of fast supports is pretty limited, and it's very context dependent. Most of them don't tell us anything that we don't already know, and they're rarely definitive because they're usually shared with other equally fast supports. Still, I wasn't deterred, so I wanted to make the most of the information we have, try to infer what we can, and then start looking into other questions which might give us further insight. I'm not going to make a video just because I know that it will generate views. If I'm going to publish this video, it's going to be because I found information that I felt was worth sharing. So first, let's talk about these fast supports. Unsurprisingly, we immediately find more evidence here that Corrin is the most beloved character in the game. They really went all in on the avatar, player insert, romantic, dating sim fantasy with this game. Corrin has the highest number of fast supports at 7, and honestly, even the characters who are close to Corrin aren't actually even close. For example, Sakura does have 5 fast supports, but 2 of those aren't actually romantic in nature. So realistically, if we're talking about S support options, she really only has 3, and one of those is Corrin. Oh, and by the way, if you're including both routes or if you're looking at Revelations, Corrin has an absurd 11 fast supports total. Literally, they are by far and away the most popular romantic character. It's not even close to being close. And yeah, we're going to be seeing this a lot coming up. There are actually a few characters who are extremely popular, and the trends for these characters tend to hold pretty well across the board, both on this subject of fast supports and in the topic we're going to discuss later about tiebreakers. For now, let's stick to this topic. In the overwhelming number of cases, the fast supports are basically determined by the royal family members and their retainers. Awakening had individual cases for how each pairing interacted, but Fates really loves to make a specific rule for how all supports work, and then it applies that rule across the board to the entire cast. Sakura is a great example of this. She has a fast support with Corrin, Ryoma, and Takumi, her siblings. Interestingly, she doesn't have a fast support with Hinoka, but either way, she also has a fast support with her own 2 retainers, Tsubaki and Hana. And wouldn't you know it, Tsubaki and Hana have a fast support with each other, and with Sakura. It's basically a perfect triangle of royal family member and their retainers, and then each royal family member also pairs with their own siblings. This pattern is repeated for most characters, but it's not completely absolute. So we can look at the exceptions to the rule and try to figure some things out. Like, for example, Sakura not having a fast support with Azura or Hinoka, but having a fast support with her male siblings suggests that maybe she gets along better with her brothers than her sisters, for whatever reason. And speaking of siblings, Kaze's only fast support is with his brother, Saizo. He doesn't even have a fast support with Corrin, if you can believe it. In fact, Silas also doesn't have a fast support with Corrin. It's relatively amusing that the one super popular character with all of the fast supports is also the character that breaks the rule of not fast supporting with their own retainers. And before I talk about the next thing, I want to briefly mention that I did look into Revelations and the cross-route pairings, but it seems that none of the characters have a fast support with anyone from the alternate route. So unfortunately, there's nothing extra to be gained by looking at Revelations. Unless I missed something, in which case let me know, But otherwise, I'm just going to stick to talking about the games within the context of either Birthright or Conquest, just because it makes things easier and keeps things simple. Next up, we have Camilla, who loves all of her siblings and both of her retainers. She follows the siblings and retainers rule very strictly, a quality that is only shared with Leo and Ryoma. People often say that Camilla is the true Ryoma equivalent of Conquest rather than Xander, and the evidence here is pretty compelling. You see, in Birthright, Ryoma is also the one character who fast supports with all of his siblings and both of his retainers, just like Camilla. As for Xander, he does fast support with his siblings, but he doesn't have a fast affinity with Laslow. Although they can get an A support together, it's just not a fast support. But Xander is involved in a type of support pattern that I did see repeat, so I want to talk about that, and it has to do with Laslow. You see, there are actually a shockingly small number of characters in the game who only have a single romantic support. We do have cases like Kaze and Saizo, as well as Flora and Felicia, who have a fast support with their sibling and not with any romantic partners. But in general, if a character has a fast support with a romantic partner, they usually also have a fast support with at least one other person. In many cases, this is either Corrin or another royal family member. So this finally brings me to the first case where I think it's relevant to talk about game data that might give us some information about how certain characters might canonically feel in terms of romantic interest. There are 3 cases, and I'm going to talk about 2 of them right now. First of all, we have Hinata. He seems to have a crush on Oboro. He has a fast support with her and not with any other character. He's one of the few retainers who doesn't fast support with his own royal. In this case, he doesn't fast support with Takumi. And this seems to suggest, at least in terms of support partners, that Xander's equivalent is actually Takumi, because their support patterns follow the same pattern. You see, Laslow has a fast support with Peri, and not with any other character. It's difficult for me to imagine these two together, but maybe there's something here. Either way, Laslow is only interested in Peri, and not with anyone else. Funny enough, in both cases, Oboro does have a fast support with Takumi, and Peri does have a fast support with Xander. So in the case of these love triangles, it looks like Hinata and Laslow are the only characters who have an Awakening-style fast support where they're only interested in one person and not interested in anybody else. It's just a bit sad that the targets of their affection don't seem to feel the same way. But what's really funny about all of this is that in the story, characterization, and lore, both Laslow and Hinata are known for being flirty characters. So it's very interesting they made the decision to have them be the only guys who have a clearly defined, one favored partner, fast romantic support. Now I could pad the video by going over every single case of royals and the retainers, but trust me when I say I've pretty much talked about everything interesting on this particular subject, aside from one specific character that I'm saving for later. All of the remaining cases follow the same rules. The characters have fast support with their siblings and with their retainers. But before I talk about the one remaining special case, I want to talk about the tiebreaker rules. You see, I got this idea that even if the supports didn't build at different speeds, like in Awakening, we might still be able to get some information by checking how the game settles a tiebreaker. This idea single-handedly inspired me so much that it made me think this video might be worth doing after all, and I started doing actual research, even in spite of the fact that the basic fast-medium support system and the repeated support patterns across all characters makes the evidence here feel less decisive. Now, I'm sad to report, after doing the research and looking into it, Fates once again sticks to what seems to be its core design philosophy. There is one general rule for how tiebreakers are handled, and every character in the game follows the same rule. We can make funny observations about which characters are the most popular by examining this rule, but otherwise it doesn't give us much useful information about specific characters, and honestly, this made me kinda sad. I think I understand at least some reasons why these changes might have been made, but for me, this was a big step back from the system in Awakening and how it tells us so much about the characters. In terms of building supports and planning out your routing, I suppose it is more complicated if you have to account for the fact that characters all gain support points at different speeds with different characters, but the fact that Lisa gains fast support points with Vake faster than with anyone else, that tells us something about both characters. It uses game data to create an element of the story and conveys information to the player in a way that can only be done in a video game. You couldn't do this in a book, manga, movie, or TV show, and I personally love storytelling and writing elements that take advantage of the unique medium in which they exist. By removing that, Fates made it easier to plan out support routing, but they took away valuable information which made it possible for us to understand something about each character, how they individually think and feel about the other members of the cast. It was replaced by a simple rule that everyone now follows. So, how does this rule work? Basically, the game looks at the list of characters in the support log and it goes from top to bottom. If you're higher on the list, you win the tiebreaker. And yeah, sadly, that's it. I just explained it. So as a result, the most popular character is going to be Corrin, because they are at the top of the support log. They're at the top of the list. Not only do they have the most fast supports of any character by a staggering amount, but they will also win every single tiebreaker always, meaning that even among the medium support options, every person who can love Corrin, which is everyone, is going to be more predisposed towards loving Corrin more than any of their other medium partners. Yeah, the Corrin glazing in this game, it's that bad. Even the game's code is telling us that everyone loves Corrin. So aside from Corrin, I guess there's one interesting thing we can discuss. Who are the other popular candidates? You might think it was the same order in which the characters join the game, but this is actually not the case. And you might think that it exclusively favors royals, but again, this is not exactly true. At the very least, in this instance, they might have been thinking about which characters were intended to be more popular, or probably also likely the support log just happens to be the order in which the characters were added to the game data by the development team. As someone who has looked at the internal character order list in other games like Fire Emblem 6 and Fire Emblem 8, I can tell you they are sometimes listed in a very strange order in the game's data that makes seemingly no sense and you probably would have never guessed. I actually almost found that to be its own subject worth making a video about, but that's a topic for another day if anybody actually wants to hear about it. Right now I'm going to tell you the most popular male and female characters on each route, and then finally we're going to get to that special little piece of information that I've been hiding, alluding to, and teasing for this entire video. So hang on for just one more minute because we're almost there. Now, as I already mentioned, everybody loves Corrin the most, so male and female Corrin would naturally be at the top of every single list. But aside from that, in Nor, the most popular male is Xander, followed by Leo, followed by Benny. This does seem to put a priority order on the royal brothers, although the idea of Benny being one of the most attractive males who is winning plenty of romantic tiebreakers is quite amusing. The dude is an absolute bear. Again, if you're not 100% sure what I'm talking about here or how this works, I'll go ahead and cover that information. Basically, within a single map, a character can only gain +3 support points with a single partner, normally, +2 points with another partner, and then +1 point with a third person. But what happens if you get +3 points with 3 different characters? Well, using what I've just said as an example, Xander would get +3 support points, but another character like Niles or Odin would get pushed down. They would only get +2 instead of also getting +3. This is what I mean when I say that characters prefer to go after Xander rather than going after Niles or Odin. That's the tiebreaker rule. On the female side, I did notice something interesting, and this has to do with cross-route pairings. As it turns out, although there are no cross-route pairings that have fast supports, there are cases where they can win tiebreakers, many cases in fact. Specifically, Hoshidan women appear above Nohrian women on the tiebreaker list. This means that Benny is more likely to go after Rinka than he would be inclined to go after any of his potential Nohrian partners, if you were playing Revelations. What's very strange, however, is that the women don't follow the same rule. Benny, for example, he's actually quite low on Rinka's list. All of the Hoshidan males are listed first. And in most other cases, this is also true. It's only specifically that Nohrian males seem to have a very strong preference for Hoshidan women, in the cases where they're able to access cross-route supports in Revelations. I guess maybe this says something about Hoshidan women, I'm not really sure. But anyway, putting that tangent aside, if we're sticking with the Conquest route, like I said I was going to do, the most popular women in Conquest are Felicia, Azura, and Mozu. Now, I am about 99% sure that this is because of the exact trivia that I mentioned above. Due to being present in all 3 routes, the game seems to have sorted them below the birthright characters, but above the Conquest characters. Because if you go down from there, the next 3 most popular true Nohrian potential brides are Camilla, followed by Elise, followed by Charlotte. And given that Charlotte is an equivalent character to Benny, this is certainly what I have come to expect from Fates at this point. The game absolutely loves setting a rule and following it strictly. Xander, Leo, and Benny is perfectly mirrored by Camilla, Elise, and Charlotte. And it's like they went out of their way to tell us as little as possible with the game data in terms of supports this time. Switching over to Hoshido and looking at the birthright characters, on this side, there is no weird case of the lists being shuffled to allow for cross-route tiebreakers. The Hoshido characters are the more isolationist, and they always prefer their Hoshido partners in the case of a tiebreaker. The most popular non-Corrin options for the males are Ryoma, followed by Takumi, and then Saizo. Okay, honestly, when I did my first pass of the data, for some reason I thought Saizo was in second place, but when I looked at it again later on, when I was working on this section of the script, it looked like Saizo actually does appear below Takumi. And this makes it more clear that the game does have a preference for putting the royal siblings in the first two spaces, which is something that I missed initially because I thought Saizo was number 2 in Hoshido. Saizo being number 3 is still fairly interesting and pretty cool. I guess the women of Hoshido really like a bad boy tsundere ninja. Come to think of it, Takumi is pretty tsundere as well, and perhaps this tells us something about Hoshidan culture. Or Saizo just happened to be entered into the game data earlier in development than someone like Kaden. That's the most likely explanation. On that note, I'm going to take back what I said before about no cross-path weirdness on the Hoshido side. I didn't notice this initially, but now that I'm looking at the final set of data, I picked up something worth mentioning. Male Hoshidan characters actually rank their male Nohrian friendships higher than any of their potential marriage partners. So Saizo, for example, would prefer to become friends with Laslow more than he wants to get married. And that's kind of funny. Anyway, the most popular Hoshidan women are Hinoka, Sakura, and Rinka. I'm not sure who the Saizo equivalent would be exactly, but this is definitely less clear-cut than Benny and Charlotte. You could make a case that Kagero should have been given the third spot to match up with Saizo, or if you're going to use Rinka, you should also use a character like Hayato, who doesn't count as anyone's specific retainer. If you match up the Wind Tribe and the Fire Tribe, it makes more sense. But that being said, Rinka is very cute, so I totally get this choice. Now, I don't want to put too much stock into these tiebreakers because they're clearly just a way for the game to sort data. It could have even just been done on accident. It's a little different from Awakening's system of clearly and intentionally giving extra support points to specific pairings, and even having special rules for their tiebreaker, like the Crom and Olivia tiebreaker rule. Especially because these tiebreaker lists don't even match for the characters, and I'm not even 100% sure what happens if you have two tiebreakers that potentially conflict with each other. I don't have the means or the tenacity to test that kind of information, but what I will tell you now is that I have come up with a list of pairings that I think are at least favored by the game, and they all have varying degrees of evidence which supports them. First, I'm going to start from the top. In my opinion, this is the most definitive pairing in the entire game in terms of evidence from gameplay mechanics, and it's also, coincidentally, the character who loves Corrin more than anyone else. The number one most canon pairing, which I place in a tier of its own, above all of the other options we're going to discuss, is Azura with male Corrin. Now, I'm not even going to discuss the full implications of such a pairing, because it could get into spoilers for people who haven't played Revelations, but this is a very interesting choice on the part of the developers. For now, I'm just going to stick to the evidence and the gameplay implications. So in terms of evidence, there are only 3 characters in the entire game who have a single fast romantic support and don't have any other conflicting fast support options. Out of Laslow, Hinata, and Azura, this means that Azura is the only female character who has this trait. She is exclusively interested in Corrin and does not have a fast support with anyone else. Combine this with the fact that Corrin will always win a tiebreaker in the event of having conflicting support points. This means that Azura has even more of a reason to favor Corrin above everyone else. If this wasn't enough, Azura and male Corrin are among a very small list of characters who are available on all 3 routes. This means that if you're playing Birthright, Conquest, or Revelations, it is a fact that Azura will prefer to marry male Corrin more than any other character. At least in terms of how the game mechanics handles her supports, she exclusively has a fast support with him, and he will always win the tiebreaker. Honestly, Azura even prefers to make friends with female Corrin faster than building a marriage with any other potential spouse. So while it is true that everyone in this game loves Corrin, and Corrin's list of fast supports is certainly extensive, at least when we examine Azura, she is a character who is really fated to be with Corrin. Even the game engine wants them to get together. I'm not an expert on fates, but I swear there is almost no possible way to make Kana good, and this is for a variety of reasons which go beyond the scope of this video. Having said that, Fates did add a new type of seal that allows your character to expand their class set by changing into the class of their spouse. So there is a little bit more to discuss here with regards to pairings. Corrin probably appreciates access to Sky Knight more than they'd appreciate having nothing in this same space, even if there are better flying classes available in the game. The problem with this pairing goes more in the other direction, and what you're giving up. Because you see, Corrin's strongest utility application is their ability to pick any class as their talent, and then pass it over to their spouse. This allows you to give any class that you want to any character in the game, even if it's only once per playthrough. In this case, however, Azura, being a dancer, mostly wants to remain as a dancer at all times. There are, of course, exceptions to this rule, but the general rule is that Azura is going to be staying in the dancer class. Therefore, she gets nothing out of the Corrin marriage, and you're completely giving up Corrin's strongest talent to a character who won't even use it. You can still plan for this by picking a talent that Corrin wants to use, pass it to Kana, or even Shigure. Below this, we can talk about the other two similar cases, although we did already briefly discuss them above. In my opinion, Laslow and Peri and Hinata Oboro fill the second tier. These characters have a unique, single-minded fast support, which shows a type of devotion that mainly existed in Awakening and was mainly removed from Fates. But between Azura, Laslow, and Hinata, we have these few cases of relatively high-tier canonized pairings buried somewhere deep in the game's data, if you're willing to look for it. However, unlike Azura, these characters do not have tiebreaker preference toward Oboro or Peri. They still follow the same tiebreaker rules as everyone else, and this even includes Laslow having a hilarious list with Orochi, Hana, Felicia, Azura, and Mozu ahead of all of his conquest-specific partners, of which Peri isn't even at the top of that list. But at least he exclusively builds fast support with the psychotic Cotton Candy Girl, so that's something, even if she doesn't win any tiebreakers. Elbow Room, Shelter, and Defender are arguably worth having Laslow spend 3 levels as a paladin. I personally have a love for movement and repositioning skills, so I love Shelter a lot. Hero is not nearly as high tier in this game as it was in Awakening, but still, Laslow does give Peri access to the hero class, and it's still a class with high physical stats and enemy phase recovery, so I guess that's something. I don't think Soleil particularly wants anything from Peri as a mother, but you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. I am quite a bit more familiar with Birthright than Conquest, giving me a pretty weird niche among Fire Emblem YouTubers. But that also makes me feel a bit more qualified to talk about Hinata and Oboro. Now, Oboro does have almost everything that she wants in her base class set. She is the kind of character that a GBA Emblem player could make great use of. She goes directly from Spear Fighter into Spear Master, picking up a collection of strong skills and utilizing them well for the rest of the game. While she doesn't require any additional seals for a beginner to make good use of her, you can make her quite a bit stronger if you plan out a more complicated build. Now, one of the big availability problems in Birthright is the lack of 1 to 2 ranged lances. If you've ever used more than one spear user in this game, you will have noticed that you don't have a second javelin, because you only get one during the campaign, and you're really feeling that in the later chapters. She has default access to Merchant, which can be useful for 2 range attacks, and is otherwise a pretty great class. This is coming from somebody who loves bow access in the 3DS Emblem games though, so I might be a little bit biased. But having said that, a bow is still not as useful for enemy phase sweeping, and enemy phase sweeping and enemy debuffing is something that Oboro really excels at for most of the game. One solution to this problem is that through Hinata, she gets access to Master of Arms. This great class gives full weapon triangle control, which is a huge deal, especially on higher difficulties when enemies have inflated weapon ranks. And more importantly, it lets her use both the Kodachi and the throwing club. Instead of fighting over the one javelin that you get in the game, Oboro suddenly has the ability to fight at 1 to 2 range by using items that you can purchase from the armory, and this is going to make Oboro feel a lot stronger and a lot more reliable. Aside from that, access to the full weapon triangle is an underrated and very powerful tool. Even access to E-rank swords and clubs allows her to use brass weapons, which many consider to be among the best in the game anyway, and more importantly, when you have weapon triangle advantage against an opponent, they lose all of their weapon rank bonuses. For example, if an enemy has S rank with axes, they have plus 40 to hit Oboro and plus 3 damage against her. For the lance-locked Spearmaster Oboro, this can be a tricky problem to deal with. However, the mere act of switching from a lance to a brass katana even though she only has E rank in swords, completely nullifies this bonus. It effectively gives the enemy minus 40 hit and minus 3 damage. That is awesome. That's not even getting into the weapon triangle advantage bonus and penalty itself. This is only the weapon rank bonuses that the enemy loses when you switch to a better weapon type. And Master of Arms gives Oboro access to the full weapon triangle. So really do not underrate this pairing and do not underestimate the Master of Arms class. Now, I don't know if I'd say that Hinata gets as much from the ability to switch into the more restrictive Spear Fighter line, but you could at least pass down Lancefair to Hisame if you wanted to give him a bit more damage as a Master of Arms. And, well, to be honest, Oni Savage, which Hinata has naturally, is a decent debuff and repositioning class, which is also true of Spear Fighter. Hinata and Hisame gaining access to Spear Fighter could help if you're trying to make one or both of them into a more utility type character who shoves and swaps around allies. Either way, let's get away from the gameplay talk. I put Azura in the top tier by herself with Corrin as the most canon pairing, and then the others we've been discussing, Laslow and Hinata, they go into the second tier with their respective partners. Now below this, we do have one additional tier that I want to talk about, and this one is by no means what I would call definitive, but it's at least interesting enough that I thought it was worth mentioning. This relates to characters who do have fast supports with their friends and siblings, but they only have a single romantic fast support. Now, typically, honestly, this only happens by sheer coincidence. Because all of the characters follow the same patterns and rules, this situation arises when a royal family member only has one vassal of the opposite gender. I don't truly believe this information means anything. It just happens to be the case because of how the game applies the same rules to all pairings universally, and how these characters relate to each other in terms of status. Again, to me, this is far less definitive than the clearly intentional marriage and support growth rates that were used in Awakening. And this is why I put these pairings on a tier even below the 3 cases that we've discussed so far. Hana only has a fast romantic support with Tsubaki. From him, she gets a class that she doesn't particularly want, and Tsubaki gets literally nothing. He has access to Samurai already. Birthright has a ton of class redundancy, and this is one of the many examples. Now, I will say, for at least half of the game, heart seals are pretty contested. There is a little bit of value in marrying a character who lets Tsubaki get into Samurai, using a marriage seal instead of a heart seal, just because marriage seals aren't contested. But this is pretty niche, and honestly, you have enough Samurai in the game already. It's not like switching Tsubaki into the Samurai class is going to blow the game wide open. And for the last one, Saizo only has a fast romantic support with Kagero. There's actually a little subplot with Saizo and Kagero having been in a relationship in the past and then split up, so this support chain is more about them rekindling their old feelings and getting back together. It's not something you typically see in Fire Emblem support conversations, so it is unique in that regard at least. Also, while these two ninja do have class redundancy, the marriage seal will actually give Saizo access to Diviner because they both have ninja in their first class slot. Diviner being a class that Saizo wants absolutely nothing to do with. And from Saizo, Kagero gets access to Samurai. Great, another Samurai, but at least she otherwise wouldn't have access to it. Ninja is just such a great class. You're often best served keeping both of them in Ninja, unless you're trying to do something more creative. Surprisingly, there are no equivalents on the Nohrian side, because the gender distribution there tends to be different. In fact, it leads to a separate and final case that I want to talk about, which relates to 2 specific royals, Camilla and Leo. Because Camilla only has female retainers, this means her only fast romantic support is with male Corrin, and Leo similarly only has male retainers. As a result, Leo's only fast romantic support is with female Corrin. But since everybody loves Corrin anyway, and these characters have fast supports, I didn't feel like it was definitive enough to give much of a mention. I think this only happens because of the gender distribution of the retainers. Having said that, I guess it's interesting that Leo and Camilla, who are portrayed as overly attached to Corrin, have Corrin as their only potential fast romantic support. Still, a big part of me doubts that this was intentional. Everything that I've seen about Fate's design seems to suggest that the developers were more interested in creating a cohesive set of rules that they could apply to all pairings, and they were far less interested in using the support logic to tell a story, or to give us any information about the characters themselves. But what do you think? Do you like this system better or worse than the one used in Awakening? Do you have any particular favorite pairings that you think deserve a spotlight? Did you learn anything new? Do you just completely disagree with everything that I say, no matter what words come out of my mouth? Either way, feel free to leave your comments below. I read all of them and I respond very frequently. And if you did like this video, a like also helps me. But for now, enjoy the rest of your day.